Her fingers, chapped and cold, closed around the thick leather wallet a stranger had just dropped. Inside was more money than she'd held in years. For a woman sleeping on a grate, it was a fortune. For the millionaire watching from the shadow of his town car, it was just the first test. Her name was Elena, and for 7 months this sidewalk had been her home. The man was Robert Thorne, a real estate magnate who didn't believe in accidents, only in data. He staged this exact scenario 12 times before. But what happened next, what Elena did with that wallet, would trigger a chain of events neither of them could predict and expose a truth Robert had spent a fortune trying to bury. He called it the litmus protocol. For the past 18 months, Robert Thorne had been conducting field experiments on human honesty, targeting individuals at society's extremes. He posed as a distracted tourist dropping a wallet near a luxury car salesman. He'd hire a temp and accidentally leave a sealed envelope of cash in the copy room. The results, logged in a confidential database, confirmed his darkest beliefs. Out of 47 subjects before Elena, only 6 had returned the full amount. The average person, his data suggested, would pocket anything over $200 if they thought no one was watching. Elena's profile was different from the start. His team's background check, conducted days before the drop, painted a picture of compounded misfortune. A certified nursing assistant for 15 years, she'd lost her apartment after a chronic back injury took her off the floor at St. Vincent's Hospital. With no family and savings drained by medical bills, the shelter system was her last resort until budget cuts eliminated her bed. The wallet contained $4,820. To Robert, it was petty cash. To her, it was a potential escape from the street. From the back seat of his car, Robert watched the monitor fed by a discreet lapel camera on his driver, who had played the role of the clumsy wealthy man. He saw Elena's initial shock, the way her hands trembled. He noted the long pause, a full 27 seconds where she simply stared at the open billfold. This was the critical window where rationalization occurred. He'd seen subjects quickly zip the wallet into a bag or nervously glance around before hurrying away. Elena did neither. She snapped it shut, stood up on stiff legs, and began to run. She weaved through the evening foot traffic, her worn sneakers slapping the pavement, clutching the leather wallet like a relay baton. She chased his driver for a full city block before catching him at a red light, tapping his arm and holding out the wallet with a single, breathless sentence. "Sir, you dropped this." The driver, following protocol, feigned grateful surprise, offered a $50 reward she refused, and took her name. Elena Martinez. She asked for nothing in return. For Robert, this was an anomaly, a statistical outlier that demanded investigation. Honesty in the face of such acute need contradicted every economic model of self-interest he believed in. Was it pathological altruism, religious conviction, or simply a smarter, longer game? He needed to know. The next phase of the litmus protocol was always an employment offer, a position of trust created specifically to apply sustained pressure. He had a vacant apartment manager job at one of his mid-tier buildings. It came with a small salary, but more importantly, it came with a master key. Elena accepted the offer with a disbelief that bordered on suspicion. At their formal meeting in his austere office, she sat stiffly in the chair facing his vast desk. "Why me?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. "There are people with references, with experience." Robert steepled his fingers. "I value observed character over stated history," he said. "You demonstrated a rare quality." He saw the war in her eyes, the fear of a trap versus the desperate hope for a lifeline. Hope won. She started the following Monday. Her first week was meticulously observed. Hidden cameras in the building's lobby and office documented her every interaction. She was painfully diligent, arriving early, staying late, meticulously logging maintenance requests tenants had ignored for months. She fixed a leaking sink for an elderly widow named Irene, not by filing a work order, but by watching a video tutorial and buying the washer with her own meager funds. Robert watched the footage, intrigued and faintly annoyed. It was inefficient, it was emotional, it was not the behavior of someone playing a calculated game. Then on Thursday, he initiated phase 2. He instructed his head of security to call Elena to the main corporate office downtown, citing an urgent paperwork discrepancy with her housing benefit. The ruse would take approximately 90 minutes. Before she left, Robert himself visited the apartment building. He entered the manager's office, the one place Elena was told was her private, secure space. In the back of a shallow supply closet, behind boxes of light bulbs, was a small, reinforced safe. It was used for holding spare keys and the building's petty cash fund for emergencies, a fund that contained exactly $1,000 in mixed bills. Robert disengaged the lock, leaving the safe door slightly ajar, its contents plainly visible from the closet entrance. He then adjusted the camera in the office ceiling to ensure a perfect, unobstructed view. The test was set. Temptation placed directly in her path. The pressure point, however, was not just the money. It was the context. That morning, Robert had also ensured Elena received a certified letter. It was a final notice from a medical collections agency detailing an overdue $1,200 debt for her initial injury scan, a debt she'd been ignoring because she could not pay a single dollar of it. The letter arrived at the building just after she left for the corporate office. It sat unopened on the center of her desk, directly in her line of sight upon return. Robert returned to his downtown tower and watched the multi-camera feed on a wall of screens. He saw Elena return, her expression weary from the confusing and ultimately fruitless trip. She sank into her desk chair, noticed the letter, and opened it. The camera caught the slow slump of her shoulders, the way she pressed her fingers against her closed eyelids. He watched her read the amount again. She sat in defeated silence for 3 full minutes. Then, needing to stow her bag, she stood and walked toward the supply closet. This was the moment. Robert leaned forward, his focus absolute. Elena opened the closet door. Her eyes swept the shelves, then dropped. She saw the safe. She saw the gaping door. She saw the stacks of cash inside. The camera captured the subtle physical jolt that went through her body, a sharp intake of breath, her hand flying to her chest. She froze, staring at the money. The $1,000 that could solve the problem spelled out in the letter in her hand. The $1,000 that no one knew was here. The $1,000 that was, for all intents and purposes, unattended and untraceable. She knelt down slowly, bringing her face level with the safe. She counted every bill, not once but twice, her lips moving silently. She stacked the 20s, the 50s, the $100 bills into neat piles on the closet floor, $1,000 exactly. Then she took the collection notice from her desk, placed it on the floor next to the money, and stared at the two sums side by side. The solution and the problem. For 5 full minutes she didn't move. Then she let out a shuddering breath, gathered the cash, and placed it back in the safe. But she didn't close the door. She stood, walked to her desk, and picked up the phone. Robert tensed, expecting a call to a friend, a confession of temptation. Instead, she dialed the number on the collections letter. When a representative answered, Elena's voice was steady but hollow. "My name is Elena Martinez. I'm calling about account number 472 Alpha. I received your final notice. I don't have the full amount, but I can start a payment plan today with $50. She listened, then nodded. "I understand the interest. I can send $50 every 2 weeks. Yes, I'm sure." She hung up, wrote a check for $50 from her brand new, nearly empty checking account, sealed it in an envelope, and stamped it. Then she returned to the closet. She looked at the safe, then at the envelope in her hand. Finally, she reached into her own wallet, a thin fabric fold holding her remaining cash from her first week's pay, a total of $38. She took out a single $5 bill, slipped it into the safe with the rest of the 1,000, and closed the door. She spun the lock, securing it. The $5 was a marker, a tangible proof that the safe had been opened and the contents were intact. Robert watched, utterly confused. Why leave a marker? Why not just close the safe and say nothing? Was it a signal to an accomplice? A bizarre moral receipt? He ordered the security team to retrieve the safe's contents immediately after Elena left for the day. The report confirmed it, $1,005. The protocol was clear. She had not taken the money. By the rigid metrics of his test, she had passed. But her actions were inconsistent, illogical. She had essentially paid $5 to prove she hadn't stolen. It made no strategic sense. The anomaly gnawed at him. He reviewed her personnel file again. St. Vincent's Hospital. He placed a call to an old contact on the board, citing a potential charitable donation and a desire to understand former employees. The story he received was different from the sterile termination notice. Elena hadn't just been injured. She'd been injured while trying to catch an elderly patient who was falling. The hospital's insurance had disputed the claim, arguing her action was outside protocol. She'd been let go during the appeal process. The contact murmured, "It was a shame. One of the most dedicated nurses on the floor. The patients loved her." This information created a dissonance in Robert's carefully ordered world. Dedication without reward, honesty that actively cost her. He decided to apply more pressure to see if this integrity had a breaking point. He instructed his property manager to stage a maintenance crisis at the apartment building, a burst pipe in a vacant unit that would require emergency funds. The petty cash safe would need to be accessed, and the count would be verified in front of Alina. If she had taken anything, the discrepancy would be discovered, and she would be fired on the spot. Next morning, the manager, a stern woman named Brenda who was unaware of the test, arrived with a plumber. She asked Alina to witness the safe being opened for the emergency withdrawal. Alina's face was pale but calm. Brenda spun the lock, opened the door, and pulled out the cash. She counted aloud. $1,005, she frowned, recounting. She looked at the logbook, which stated the fund was $1,000 even. She looked at Alina. "Why is there an extra $5 in here?" Alina met her gaze. "I opened the safe yesterday afternoon. I needed to verify the contents were secure. I added $5 of my own money as a control measure to ensure if anyone else accessed it before the next audit, the count would be off and we'd know." The explanation was so bizarre, so blatantly honest, that Brenda was speechless. She simply logged the new total and took the $800 needed for the plumber. Robert, watching the live audio feed, felt a chill. Her explanation wasn't a cover story. It was a blueprint of her mind. She wasn't thinking about theft. She was thinking about system integrity. She had treated the safe not as a temptation, but as a responsibility. For the first time, the data point in front of him felt like a person, and his experiment felt like a violation. He was about to call off the entire protocol when his personal lawyer, Simon, walked into his office unannounced, his face grave. "We have a problem, Robert. The zoning board hearing for the Harborview Towers project is in 2 days. Councilwoman Valdez is leading the opposition, and she's digging. She's filed a formal inquiry about your company's tenant screening processes, specifically allegations of discriminatory moral profiling." Simon dropped a file on the desk. "Somehow she's gotten wind of the litmus protocol, not details, but the concept. She's calling it unethical human experimentation." Robert's blood ran cold. The Harborview project was a $200 million development. If the zoning permit was denied, it would sink years of work. "How could she know?" he demanded. Simon shrugged. "A disgruntled former employee, a leaked document, it doesn't matter, she knows. And if this goes public, it's not just the project. It's the brand. It's every contract you have." The stakes had just exploded beyond a psychological game. His company was now in the crosshairs. Robert realized with a sinking feeling that Alina was no longer just a test subject. She was a potential witness. If Councilwoman Valdez found her and she spoke about the wallet, the job offer, the strange occurrences around the safe, it would corroborate the allegations. He had to secure her loyalty or ensure her silence. He decided on a dual approach. He would bring Alina deeper in, promote her, increase her dependence on the company, and bind her with gratitude. Simultaneously, his security team would begin a deep-dig background check, searching for any leverage, any past mistake that could be used to control her if necessary. The order felt vile as he gave it, a stark admission that his test had ultimately proven his own capacity for corruption, not hers. The promotion was presented the next day, a move to the corporate office as a tenant relations specialist with a 30% raise and full benefits. Alina was stunned. She accepted, again with that mixture of hope and deep-seated wariness. As she began transitioning, Robert's security team worked. They found no criminal record, no financial fraud. They did, however, find a paper trail leading to a closed case in family court from over a decade ago. Alina had petitioned for guardianship of her younger sister, Sophia, when their mother became incapacitated. The petition was granted. Sophia, now 24, was listed as a dependent, but there was a gap. Sophia's current whereabouts were unclear. The trail ended 3 years ago. Robert saw an opportunity. A missing dependent could be a point of vulnerability. He directed resources to find Sophia. Within 48 hours, they had a hit. Sophia Martinez was living in a rehab facility 2 states away, recovering from a substance abuse disorder. The facility was private, expensive. The payments, the investigator noted, were being covered by a monthly automatic bank transfer from an account in Alina's name. The amount was crippling, nearly 80% of Alina's old nursing salary. This was the missing piece. This was the anchor that had pulled Alina under. Her injury hadn't just cost her job, it had threatened her sister's lifeline. Robert now held the ultimate pressure point. He could use this to ensure Alina's cooperation, to guarantee she would never speak against him. But as he stared at the photo of Sophia, a young woman with Alina's eyes, smiling in a sunlit courtyard of the rehab center, the victory felt like ashes. He was no longer studying integrity, he was preparing to destroy it. He was still wrestling with this moral calculus when his head of security called, panic in his voice. "So we have a breach. The entire encrypted Litmus protocol database, subject profiles, video logs, financial triggers, it's been copied. The access originated from an anonymous terminal, but the digital footprint leads back to our own corporate network. Someone inside the building is leaking it." Robert's world tilted. "To who?" he barked. "We don't know for sure, but the data packet was routed through a server cluster known to be used by investigative journalists and activist councils." The security chief paused. "Sir, Councilwoman Valdez's office uses those same servers." The leak was out, the protocol was exposed, and at that moment, Robert's assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Thorne, Alina Martinez is here for her orientation meeting. Should I send her in?" Alina entered, her posture as rigid as it had been in their first meeting. She held a new notebook and a pen, the tools of a fresh start. Robert forced a calm he didn't feel, gesturing to the chair. "Alina, welcome. We'll make this quick. I have a pressing matter to attend to." He began mechanically outlining the new role, his words flat, his eyes constantly flicking to the security alert flashing silently on a secondary monitor. Alina listened, nodding occasionally, but her gaze was unsettlingly direct. She was observing him. Halfway through his explanation of departmental structure, she interrupted quietly. "Is everything all right, Mr. Thorne? You seem distracted." The question, so simple and perceptive, caught him off guard. It was the concern of the nurse she had been, not the employee she was. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Just a minor systems issue." She nodded slowly, unconvinced. "If this is a bad time, I can come back." He was about to agree when his lawyer, Simon, burst into the office without knocking, his face white. "Robert, it's live. She's holding a press conference right now." He didn't need to say who. Simon turned on the wall-mounted television, flipping to a local news channel. Councilwoman Valdez stood at a podium emblazoned with the city seal, a stack of papers in her hand. Her voice was sharp, righteous, a gross violation of privacy and human dignity. "What we have uncovered is not a tenant screening process, but a clandestine psychological operation conducted on vulnerable citizens without their knowledge or consent. We are referring to it as the Litmus Protocol." A graphic flashed on screen behind her, a blurred but recognizable screenshot of Robert's own database interface, with subject codes and dollar amounts visible. Alina, sitting frozen in her chair, looked at the screen, then slowly turned her head to look at Robert. Her expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror to a cold, clear understanding. The wallet, the safe, the promotion, the pieces clicked together with an almost audible sound. Robert muted the TV. The silence in the room was suffocating. Alina stood up, her notebook falling to the floor. "It was you," she whispered. "The wallet, it was never an accident." There was no anger yet, just a profound, devastated disillusionment. "You were testing me, this whole job, it was part of a test." "Alina, let me explain," Robert began, but Simon cut him off. "There's no time for that. The zoning board has just announced an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. They're fast-tracking the denial. Our stock is already dropping in after-hours trading." The professional and personal catastrophes were merging into one tidal wave. Alina took a step back toward the door. "I need to go," she said, her voice hollow. "You can't," Robert said, the command slipping out before he could stop it. Both Alina and Simon stared at him. He modulated his tone, but the threat beneath it was thin. "I mean, it would be better if we could discuss this, to clarify the context." He was thinking of the data leak, the security breach. Was she the source? Had she somehow accessed the system? "Clarify what?" Alina asked, her voice gaining a sharp edge. that you dropped a wallet full of money to see if a homeless woman would steal it, that you gave her a job just to leave a vault open and watch her again. What is there to clarify?" She looked at him with a disgust that was more powerful than any anger. "You measured my integrity while showing none of your own." She turned and left, closing the door softly behind her. That quiet click felt more final than a slam. Robert immediately turned to his head of security on the speakerphone. "Track her. I want to know where she goes, who she talks to. Now." He was in full damage control mode, the moral quandaries of an hour ago vaporized by survival instinct. The next 24 hours were a relentless storm. News vans encircled his corporate tower. Headlines blared, "Millionaire's real-life morality test," and "Wallet Gate, integrity for sale." The litmus protocol was the lead story on every network. Former subjects, their identities protected by journalists, came forward with stories of strange job interviews, misplaced valuables, and unexplained offers. The public outrage was instant and unanimous. Robert's security team reported that Alina did not go to the media. She returned to her apartment manager's unit, packed a single bag, and left. She used cash for a bus ticket, destination unknown. The team lost her. This, paradoxically, terrified Robert more than if she'd held her own press conference. Her silence was a mystery, a potential weapon waiting to be deployed. Then the second blow landed. An anonymous digital package arrived at the inboxes of every major news outlet and the city council. It contained the unredacted, full litmus protocol database. Names, addresses, financial histories, and video clips of all 48 subjects, including Alina. The leak was now a flood. The public saw the cold, clinical notes Robert had written. On Alina's file, his initial analysis read, "Subject exhibits anomalous honesty. Motive unclear. Proceed to phase 2 pressure." The city erupted. Protesters gathered outside his buildings. Tenants began organizing rent strikes. The Attorney General announced a formal investigation into potential privacy law violations and unethical business practices. Simon presented him with a list of 17 impending lawsuits. Harborview Towers was dead. In the eye of this hurricane, Robert received a single typed letter delivered by courier, no return address. It contained one sentence: "You looked for the price of my integrity, now you're paying yours." It was unsigned, but he knew it was from Alina. The letter was a psychological strike, perfectly aimed. She wasn't seeking money or fame. She was reflecting his own experiment back at him, demonstrating that his actions had a cost he never calculated. Desperate and cornered, Robert made his fateful move. He instructed his team to use the information about Sophia, Alina's sister. They were to contact Alina indirectly through a fake support group email and imply they had damaging information about Sophia's past that could jeopardize her recovery, unless Alina publicly stated the wallet incident was a misunderstood act of charity and the litmus protocol was a fiction created by the media. It was blackmail, pure and simple. The final, ugly proof that his test had only ever been about his own capacity for corruption. The message was sent into the digital void. There was no response. For 2 days, nothing. Robert clung to the fragile hope that fear for her sister would force Alina's compliance. Then, on the morning of the Attorney General's deposition, as Robert was preparing to perjure himself before state officials, his assistant informed him he had a visitor. Not a lawyer, not a reporter. Alina Martinez. She waited for him in a small, spare conference room. She looked exhausted but utterly calm. She carried no bag, no phone. Robert entered, closing the door, expecting a negotiation, a surrender. "You got my message," he stated, trying to reclaim authority. "I did," she said, her voice was steady, "and I brought you something in return." She slid a plain manila envelope across the table. Robert opened it cautiously. Inside were printed bank statements and wire transfer records. They were not his. They were old, dating back over a decade. They showed a series of monthly payments from a corporate entity called Thorn Holdings to a private medical institution. The patient listed was Sophia Martinez. The payments started just after Alina's 18th birthday and stopped abruptly 3 years ago, around the time Sophia disappeared into the system. Robert's breath caught. What is this? Alina's eyes held his, and for the first time he saw a deep, old sorrow there. My mother didn't just get sick. She was a housekeeper for a wealthy family. She had an accident on their property. A fall from a loose balcony railing she'd reported as faulty multiple times. The family offered a private settlement to avoid a lawsuit. They would cover all future medical costs for her dependent children. The head of that family was your father, Robert. The payments for Sophia's care, that was the settlement. Your company stopped them when your father died and you took over, citing accounting irregularities. You cut off the money that was keeping my sister in therapy, that was keeping her alive. Robert felt the floor drop out from under him. The litmus protocol hadn't found a random homeless woman. It had found the daughter of a woman his father's negligence had broken. He had been testing a victim of his own family's legacy. Her integrity wasn't an anomaly, it was what remained after his world had taken everything else. The wallet, Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. When I opened it, I saw the driver's license. Robert Thorne, I knew exactly who you were. I returned it because I wanted to look you in the eye and see if you were as hollow as I remembered. And you gave me the job. You let me into your building. You gave me access. She leaned forward slightly. You were so busy testing me, you never wondered why I was so good with locks, with systems, with patient, observant detail. You never asked what a nursing assistant does in a hospital with secure medication cabinets and confidential records. A terrifying realization dawned on him. The data lake, he breathed. Elena didn't smile, she simply nodded. The safe was the final test. My test for you, I knew you were watching. I left the $5 so you would know I'd been there, that I'd seen the temptation you planted, and I'd chosen to add to it instead of take from it. I was giving you a chance to see a different way. You responded by trying to buy my silence, then blackmail me with my sister. She stood up. The copy of the database is with the Attorney General. The original is with every subject whose life you experimented on. The game is over, Robert. You built a protocol to find honest people. You just never expected them to be smarter than you. She walked to the door, then paused, looking back at the shattered man behind the desk. You asked for the price of my integrity. It was always the same, the truth, and now you've paid it. He sat there for a long time. The printed records of his father's forgotten settlement spread before him like an indictment. The litmus protocol wasn't an original sin, it was an inheritance, a compulsion to test others born from the guilt of a harm his family had covered up, not healed. He had spent years and millions searching for dishonest people, when the only profound deceit he ever uncovered was his own. The collapse was swift and total. The Attorney General, armed with the full database, filed a litany of charges: invasion of privacy, unlawful surveillance, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraudulent business practices. The civil lawsuits followed like an avalanche, 48 individual suits that were quickly consolidated into a massive class action. His company's stock, already bleeding, was delisted. Banks called in loans. The board of directors, in a desperate bid for survival, voted him out as CEO. The Harborview Towers project was not just denied. The city seized the land through eminent domain for public housing, citing the unethical practices of the developer as a matter of public record. Robert's personal fortune, once estimated at over $300 million, evaporated into legal fees, settlements, and asset forfeitures. Within 6 months, Thorne Holdings filed for bankruptcy. The empire built on distrust had been dismantled by truth. Robert sold his penthouse, his cars, everything of tangible value. He moved into a small rented studio, a space not unlike the dingy room he'd lived in before his first corporate job. The press lost interest. The story moved from the front page to the business section, then to the archives. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in ethics seminars. But the internal reckoning was far from over. He kept seeing Elena's face, not in anger, but in that final, sorrowful calm. She had looked at him with the pity of someone who understood the exact dimensions of the cage he'd built for himself. Her integrity had a cost, she'd said, the truth. He was now paying that same price every day in the quiet of his own mind. He had found the breaking point of a human soul, and it was his own. A year to the day after the press conference, a formal letter arrived. It was from the settlement administrator for the class action lawsuit. A fund had been established for the 48 subjects. The letter stated that, as part of the mediated resolution, each subject was to receive a base compensation. Attached was a list of names and disbursements. Robert scanned it numbly until he saw her name, Elena Martinez. Next to it was an amount, $1. He stared at it, confused. Then he read the footnote. Elena Martinez had refused the monetary settlement. Instead, she had requested that her portion of the funds be distributed equally among the other 47 subjects. The $1 was a symbolic token to make the legal release binding. She had taken nothing. Again. This final act of refusal shattered what was left of him. She hadn't just passed his test. She had rendered the entire currency of the test worthless. Money, the ultimate lever in his world, held no power over her. Her integrity wasn't for sale at any price because it wasn't a commodity. It was simply who she was. Driven by a need he couldn't name, apology, understanding, absolution, Robert used the last of his uncontested funds to hire a discreet investigator with one instruction: find Elena, but do not contact her. Just tell me where she is and if she's okay. The report came back a week later. Elena and her sister Sophia had moved to a small town in the Pacific Northwest. Elena was working as a visiting nurse for a rural health clinic. Sophia was stable, working part-time at a local library. They lived in a modest rented house. The investigator included a single long-lens photograph. It showed Elena on a porch, holding a mug, looking out at a mountain range. She was smiling, not the strained, hopeful smile from their meetings, but a real, quiet, peaceful one. Robert booked a one-way flight. He didn't know what he would do when he got there. He just knew he had to see, with his own eyes, the life that existed on the other side of his broken experiment. He rented a car and drove to the town, a place of towering evergreens and slow-moving rivers. He found the house from the photograph. He parked down the street and watched from a distance. He saw Elena come home from work, greeted by Sophia on the porch. He saw them talking, laughing. He saw the simple, unobserved rhythm of a life lived honestly. There was no test here, no hidden cameras, no pressure points, just existence. It was the most beautiful and the most devastating thing he had ever witnessed. As dusk settled, he finally got out of the car and walked toward the house. He didn't go to the door. He stopped at the foot of the driveway, knowing he had no right to step further. Elena was in the garden, pulling weeds. She sensed his presence and looked up. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the distance. She didn't seem surprised. She slowly stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "Hello, Robert," she said. Her voice was calm, the same as in his office, but without the edge of sorrow. "Elena," he managed. I had to see." He gestured weakly, unable to articulate the storm inside him. "Your settlement, you took nothing." "I didn't want anything from you," she said simply. "I already got what I needed." "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The truth," she said, "out in the open, and my sister back. We're okay now, we're free." She looked at him, not with forgiveness, but with a clear-eyed finality. "What do you need, Robert?" The question leveled him. He had come expecting condemnation, maybe hoping for a shred of forgiveness. He hadn't come with an answer. He looked down at the gravel driveway. "I don't know how to be," he trailed off, unable to finish. "You start by being honest," she said, "with yourself. You spent so much time trying to find what was broken in everyone else, you never fixed what was broken in you." She paused. "My mother, she never blamed your father. She said accidents happen. She was angry that the help stopped, that we were forgotten. But she taught me that carrying hate for the past is a weight that only hurts the one carrying it." Robert felt hot tears in his eyes, which he blinked away furiously. "I am so sorry, Elena, for everything, my father, the wallet, all of it." She nodded slowly, accepting the apology but not absolving its weight. "I know, now you have to decide what you do with that sorry. You can carry it like a punishment, or you can use it to do one honest thing." She looked back toward her house, where Sophia was now watching from the window. "Goodbye, Robert." She turned and walked back up the driveway. She didn't look back. Robert stood there until the porch light flicked on, then he returned to his rental car and drove away. He didn't fly back. He drove for days, through mountains and deserts, the vast emptiness of the country mirroring the void inside him. But for the first time, the void wasn't filled with suspicion. It was just empty, a clean space. When he finally returned to the city, he did the only honest thing he could think of. He went to the law firm handling the class action and signed over the last of his personal assets, a dormant investment portfolio that had escaped the initial seizure, into the settlement fund. He instructed that it be anonymized, a final addition to the compensation for the 48. He kept enough for a few months' rent. Then he applied for a job, not in an office, with his hands. He used a false name, Robert Shaw, and his long-forgotten engineering degree to get a job with a nonprofit that built affordable housing. He started as a junior site supervisor. The work was physically exhausting, mentally straightforward. He built walls, ran electrical lines, installed flooring. He saw families, single parents, people who had been on the edge, walk into the homes his crew had built. He saw the hope on their faces, a hope not predicated on passing a test, but on being given a chance. It was the inverse of his protocol. He never saw Elena again, but one day, a year into his new life, a plain envelope arrived at his worksite. Inside was a postcard from the Pacific Northwest. On the front was a photo of a river. On the back, in handwriting he recognized, were 3 words, "One honest thing." It was unsigned. Robert Thorne, the millionaire who tested integrity, was gone. In his place was Robert Shaw, a man who, brick by brick, was learning how to build it. He learned that trust isn't found by setting traps. It's built by being reliable. That character isn't revealed in a single moment of temptation, but in the daily, unobserved choice to do the right thing, even when it costs you. And he learned the hardest, most beautiful lesson of his life. Sometimes, the miracle you need doesn't come as a reward for being good. It comes as a consequence of finally, painfully, choosing to be real. The redemption he desperately sought wasn't waiting in a majestic package of renewed wealth or power. It was waiting for him in the blistered skin of his hands, the ache in his back at the end of an honest day's work, and the quiet peace of a night's sleep earned, not bought. The global study that dropped 17,000 wallets proved a surprising truth. People are more honest than we think, especially when the stakes are high. But Robert Thorne's private, cruel experiment uncovered a deeper, more personal truth. We don't build trust by testing others. We build it by being trustworthy. We don't discover character by setting traps. We reveal our own. Elena's journey from the street to a peaceful porch wasn't a reward for passing a test. It was the natural consequence of living by an internal compass that no external pressure could break. Her integrity wasn't a performance for hidden cameras. It was the foundation of her being, forged in the fires of loss and hardship, and it became the anvil upon which Robert's hollow world was shattered and remade. His story forces us to ask a difficult question. How many of us, in our own ways, are running a version of the litmus protocol, viewing the people in our lives, employees, partners, even strangers, through a lens of suspicion, waiting for them to fail to prove our darkest theories about human nature correct? And in doing so, what beautiful possibilities for connection are we blinding ourselves to? The real twist in this tale of tests and temptations is that the person who needed to pass wasn't the one with nothing. It was the one with everything. The vault that was left open wasn't the one in the supply closet. It was the one in Robert Thorne's heart, and the only thing that could ever fill it was the humility to kneel on the cold linoleum of his own failure and finally begin again. We often walk through life believing we are the ones conducting the experiments, setting the terms, and judging the results. But the universe has a way of turning the tables. The moment you believe you can measure another soul's worth is the moment you become the subject of a far greater test. And the question is never about what you would do with a wallet full of cash. It's about what you choose to do with the truth when it stares you in the face, empty-handed and unafraid. If this story made you think, if it reminded you of the power of a single honest choice in a world full of complicated deceptions, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell for more journeys into the heart of what makes us human. Until next time.